Thank you, everyone, for being here. My name is Michelle Bachmann. I'm a member of Congress from Minnesota's 6th Congressional District. I'm also the chairman of the Tea Party Caucus in the House of Representatives and a former federal tax litigation attorney for the IRS, as well as the author of the bill to repeal Obamacare. This is a momentous day. 1 week ago today, we held the hearings in the House of Representatives on Benghazi. Questions were asked 1 week ago today. Were decisions made about rescuing Americans in Benghazi based upon political considerations? 1 week ago tomorrow, we found out devastating information again, that the IRS apparently used for political purposes information about people's beliefs, whether they were religious beliefs or political beliefs, potentially to deny people their tax status if they tended to have beliefs that were against this administration. And then we learned subsequently that applications were approved if they had beliefs in line with this administration. Subsequent to the original story, we had an admission from the IRS that they in fact made these decisions. This is extremely troubling, because the axiom is the power to tax is the power to destroy. And now, with the implementation of Obamacare at hand, and knowing that it is the IRS, the Internal Revenue Service, that will be the enforcing mechanism for this new entitlement program of Obamacare, it's very important to ask, and now it is reasonable to ask, could there potentially be political implications regarding health care, access to health care, denial of health care? Will that happen based upon a person's political beliefs or their religiously held beliefs? These questions would have been considered out of bounds a week ago. Today, these questions are considered more than reasonable and more than fair for the American people. What you will hear today are shocking stories of common people from across the United States who wanted to be able to exercise their First Amendment free speech rights as American citizens. But they were denied those rights. Why? Because their tax status was denied in order to be able to speak out as an organization. We've collected an impressive group of individuals that have very important things to say to you today. We have members of the United States Senate, members of the House of Representatives, but most importantly, we will hear from those people who were victimized by this administration and this administration's policies. And first, I would like to ask to come to the microphone Leader Mitch McConnell, the Republican leader of the United States Senate. Thank you, Mr. Leader.
Well, thank you very much, Michelle. Eric Wilson from Kentucky is here, and I first heard about this issue from him in the summer of 2012, and in fact made a speech about the threat of the federal government using the apparatus of the federal government to quiet the voices of critics. At the time, the Washington Post and others said it was just a red herring. Now we know it really happened. These horror stories of the government attempting to quiet the voices of critics is apparently rather rampant. And it's interesting to note that the IRS apparently even gave to a left-wing group, ProPublica, information on one of the conservative groups before their tax status had even been established. This is runaway government at its worst. Who knows who they'll target next? There's going to be a complete and thorough investigation of this in Congress, not only who above may have known about it, but what the rank and file believed was their mission. The truth will come out. It always does. It can come out sooner or later, but I guarantee you we'll find out everything that happened. Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here.
Thank you, Leader. Next, we have Senator Rand Paul, also from Kentucky. Senator Paul.
There's something profoundly un-American about targeting your political opponents. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent in this country, to take the abuse of a $3.8 trillion government, the power of that government, and to use it to stifle opposition is profoundly un-American. I'm a physician. I'm quite worried about the privacy of medical records. I'm quite worried that your medical records now will be evaluated by the IRS that seems to have the ability and seems to have the penchant to use political persuasion and to search out political opponents. So I'm very concerned about this. Someone needs to be held responsible. Someone needs to be imprisoned. Someone needs to be prosecuted. The resignation is a step in the right direction, but we need to find out who wrote this policy, who approved this policy, and they need to be held accountable.
Thank you, Senator. And that goes all the way to the White House. We need to know what the White House knew and when they knew it. And Senator Paul is also the chair of the Tea Party caucus in the United States Senate. I neglected to mention that. We have with us also Senator Mike Lee from Utah.
These three events that have gotten so much attention over the last few days, IRS, AP, Benghazi, tend to confirm a lot of our worst fears about our government. They tend to tell us what we don't want to believe, but that sometimes might be true, that your government's targeting you, that your government's spying on you, and that your government is lying to you. We need to remember that this isn't just an act of a Democratic administration attacking Republicans. It's much, much more than that. This is an act of a political ruling class in Washington, regardless of political affiliation, targeting the American people. You see, we have to remember that when the federal government gets too big, it becomes unmanageable. In this respect, I agree wholeheartedly with what David Axelrod said yesterday. I don't think I've ever uttered those words before. He said that the federal government's simply too vast for the President of the United States to control, to manage, to supervise appropriately. And he's right. No one can manage something this big, and therein lies the problem. Our federal government, while created for purposes that James Madison described as few and defined, has become a government without limit, without end. No one can manage a $4 trillion annual government. No one certainly can manage a $5 trillion government. We don't want it to become that. We need to roll it back. We need to return it to a simpler, more manageable government, because that's the only way that we're ever going to prevent things like this from happening. When it gets too big, it gets too expensive. And when that happens, nobody's going to be able to manage the whole thing effectively. And when that happens, people are going to be targeted. They'll be targeted unfairly. We need to simplify our laws, and we need to downsize our federal government. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Lee. A man who has been fearless in asking the tough questions in the last few months of Texas, Senator Ted Cruz.
Thank you very much. I'd like to begin by thanking Michelle for organizing this, thanking our friends from the House for your leadership on this very important issue, and thanking the men and women from across the country who have come up here to join us today, including a number of Texans, my friends Katrina Pearson, Toby Walker, who've devoted thousands of hours to their lives to trying to turn this country around. You know, Thomas Jefferson told us, when government fears the citizens, there is liberty. But when citizens fear the government, there is tyranny. The last couple of weeks we've had a series of disturbing revelations, all of which share common elements between Benghazi, the IRS, and the HHS Secretary pressuring private companies to support political efforts to support Obamacare. The unifying themes in those patterns are, number one, an arrogance and view of government, the machinery of government, as a tool for partisan ends, a tool to be put in place in partisan politics to punish your political enemies, and number two, a really dismaying willingness to mislead and to deceive the American people. And I think the American people have every right to expect better. The men and women who are here today are here because they are working to try to hold their elected officials accountable, to hold us accountable. And that is exactly their prerogative, protected in the Constitution, protected in the Bill of Rights, to hold every one of us accountable. And the idea that the federal government and the IRS in particular would be targeting citizens, and in particular looking, if they had the temerity to actually speak out, exercise their constitutional rights to speak the truth, they would be subjected to special harassment, special scrutiny, special targeting. It seems to me there are a great many questions that need to be asked, including who knew about this, who didn't act to stop it, whose favor was being curried doing this. One of the most disturbing stories I've read on the IRS was that confidential taxpayer records were handed over to the co-chairman of President Obama's presidential campaign in the middle of the campaign. If the federal government is being made to behave as if it is an arm of a political partisan campaign apparatus, we are losing the constraints that the Constitution is meant to put on our government, and I'm so thankful for the citizens who are here today to hold all of us accountable.
Thank you, Ted. Thank you. We also have with us a significant number of members of the United States Congress: Congressman Joe Barton of Texas, Congresswoman Diane Black of the state of Tennessee. We have Congressman Jim Bridenstine. We have
15 minutes, as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I am back again to remind this body and the American people for what I think is perhaps the 32nd speech on this subject that I've been giving weekly, that it is time, indeed it is well past time, for Congress to wake up to the disastrous effects of global climate change. The famous Mauna Loa Observatory has for the first time ever just hit 400 parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. That is an alarming benchmark to have hit. And what is happening over on the House side today? They are repealing Obamacare for the 37th time. That's the level of seriousness in Washington right now. In particular, our oceans. The presiding officer represents the Bay State, I represent the ocean state, and our oceans face an unprecedented set of challenges that come from climate change, as well as from pollution and energy exploration and more. And you just have to look around to see it. You can look up to the far north and you see that the Arctic ice is melting. Indeed, last summer, sea ice extent in the Arctic Ocean hit a record low. You can go down to the south, to the tropic seas, and you see that live coral coverage on Caribbean reefs is plummeting, down to less than 10% today. You go to the top of the food chain, and you see marine mammals so laden with PCBs, flame retardants, mercury, and other bioaccumulative pollutants that many of them are swimming toxic waste, living, swimming toxic waste. Go to the very bottom of the food chain, and you see that the population of phytoplankton, some of our smallest ocean inhabitants and the basic building block for the oceanic food chain, have dropped 40% during the 20th century. You go far away from where you and I are, out to the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it's growing and swirling about the North Pacific Ocean. And close to my home and near to the presiding officer's home is Narragansett Bay, which is 4 degrees warmer in the winter than it was just a few decades ago. Globally, the most threatening challenge and the force behind many of these others is ocean acidification. Our oceans have absorbed more than 550 billion tons of our carbon pollution. 550 billion tons. Try to wrap your head around a number that big. That's the carbon that the ocean has absorbed from the atmosphere, from the excess that we have pumped into the atmosphere. The result is pretty clear, and it is a matter of basic chemistry. The oceans have become more acidic. Indeed, they have become 30% more acidic. And by the way, that's a measurement. That's not a theory. By the end of this century, the increase could be as much as 160% more acidic. That makes life a lot harder for species like oysters, crabs, lobsters, corals, and even those plankton that comprise the very base of the food web. Ocean temperatures are changing dramatically, also driven by carbon pollution. Sea surface temperatures in 2012 from the Gulf of Maine to Cape Hatteras were the highest recorded in 150 years. That's another measurement, by the way. Fish stocks are shifting northward, with some disappearing from U.S. waters as they move farther offshore. And as we know, as temperature rises, water expands in volume. And on top of that, fresh water pours out of Arctic snowpack and ice sheets that are melting, so sea levels are rising. Tide gauges in Newport, Rhode Island show an increase in average sea level of nearly 10 inches since 1930. That is a big deal when we in Rhode Island think about how devastating the great hurricane of 1938 was to our shores, and what more would now befall us with 10 more inches of sea for such a storm to throw at our shores. At these tide gauges, measurements show not only that sea level is rising, but the rate of sea level rise is increasing, which matches reports that since 1990, sea level has been rising faster than the rate predicted by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. I've said before, we will continue to take advantage of the ocean's bounty, as we should. We will trade, we will fish, and we will sail. We will extract fuel and harness the wind. We will work our oceans. Navies and cruise ships, sailboats and supertankers will plow their surface. We cannot undo this part of our relationship with the sea. What we can change is what we do in return. We can, for the first time, become takers, become not just takers, but caretakers of our oceans. We are beginning to take some baby steps. Last week, the Senate voted 67 to 32 to authorize a national endowment for the oceans, coasts, and Great Lakes, a funding stream for research, restoration, and protection of our marine and coastal resources. I hope before long that we can find a way to fund it, working with all of my colleagues. The famous ocean explorer Bob Ballard has described as a, quote, major problem the disconnect between the importance of oceans and the meager funds we as a nation invest to not only understand their complexity, but become responsible stewards of the bounty they represent. This endowment, if we can get it over the remaining legislative hurdles and get it funded, will help us become more responsible stewards of that bounty. It will help us better respond to oil spills. It will help coastal states protect or relocate coastal infrastructure. It will help our fisheries and marine industries take part in economically important conservation efforts. Mr. President, I do sincerely appreciate the support shown for this amendment by colleagues from every region of the country and both sides of the aisle. Protecting the oceans, upon which our communities and our economy depend, is neither a Democrat or a Republican objective, and there ought to be a great deal of agreement on the need to meet these challenges. We also see that agreement in the bipartisan Senate Oceans Caucus, which works to increase awareness of and find common ground on issues facing the oceans and coasts. My fellow co-chair, Senator Murkowski, and honorary co-chairs, Senator Mark Begich and Senator Roger Wicker, and all of our partners are working to stop illegal, unregulated, and unreported fishing, clean up marine debris, and collect baseline scientific data so that we can make informed policy decisions. This is important work. It demonstrates the good we can accomplish when both parties come together, and I look forward to getting it done. But it is not enough. It is not enough. Until we address what is causing our oceans to change so drastically, until we protect our planet from carbon pollution unprecedented in human history, we are doing little more than putting Band-Aids on a gaping and growing wound. Mr. President, I want here today to push back on the idea that so many of us seem to have accepted that we can't do anything serious on carbon pollution. In fact, we can. And the tools to do it lie right around us, if only we'd pick them up and go to work. Here's my case, very simply. Pricing carbon is necessary. Make big carbon polluters pay a fee to the American people to cover the cost of dumping their waste into our atmosphere and oceans, a cost they now push off onto the rest of us, and return that fee to the American people. At present, however, political conditions in Congress do not allow us to price carbon. It is necessary. Political conditions do not allow us to do it, so we must change those political conditions. And we can, through three actions. One, there has to be a regulatory threat to the polluters. Two, there has to be a political threat to the deniers here in the Senate and in Congress. And three, those of us who wish to limit carbon pollution must gather the armies that are on our side. Let me go through those steps. First, as long as the polluters and their allies control Congress, legislative action is unlikely. That means we have to rely on the executive branch for regulatory action, very strong regulatory action that will change the equation for the polluters. That's the test. Will it change the equation for the polluters? Because the status quo is a win for the polluters. They pollute for free. Change that balance, and it won't take them long to come to Congress. Why? Because regulatory action puts costs directly on the polluters but creates no revenues for them. A carbon pollution fee, that creates revenues, a portion of which could offset their costs of transitioning to a green economy. If that's the choice they have, regulation with no revenues or a fee that they can get revenues from, it becomes in their interest to strike a deal in Congress. This regulatory step in the executive branch will, however, require an awakening at the White House. Second, to create a meaningful political threat, the advocates out there for our climate and our oceans will need to employ all the sophisticated political tools the polluters use, all the political artillery of the post-Citizens United world. There's an expression that you shouldn't bring a knife to a gunfight. Right now, climate advocates bring not even a knife, but a feather to this gunfight. It's no wonder we lose. But when deniers in Congress see real artillery coming on the political field against them, some will rethink. Third and last is gathering the armies. There is astonishingly wide support for action on climate. Environmental groups, obviously, the green energy and investment industry, our national security officials, property casualty insurers and reinsurers, young people, like the growing college movement for coal divestment, faith groups, many utilities, celebrities, hunting, fishing, outdoor, and conservation groups, retailers like Apple and Coca-Cola and Nike, labor groups, mayors and local officials. And the public is with us. Polls show that. The problem, most of this support is latent and unorganized. None of these groups feel they can carry this battle on their own. Yet, if they choose to unite, if we create an allied command, assemble these various divisions, and join in on a strategy that deploys them all effectively into action, that latent strength becomes potent strength. That is a game changer. When the polluting industry is looking down the barrel of a regulatory gun, when their political allies are fearful of a strongly backed political operation backed also by the American people, when mobilized and motivated forces from a wide swath of the economy, multiple sectors, are all active, the political landscape then shifts dramatically, and a price on carbon is achievable. So those who believe it is time to wake up and to take action to fend off devastating changes to our oceans and to our climate, let us be not faint of heart. Let us have the strength of our convictions and get to work and get this done. We can. The tools to do it already lie all around us. This can all take place quite rapidly. Let's get it done. Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Thank you so much.
President, note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Actually had an adversarial relationship with the chief executive, Dick Nixon. Today, it is quite different. Some might say that it's casual, cordial, folk coming in from the Obama administration into the media, people coming in from the media to the Obama administration. Some might say that it's incestuous. But what is perhaps most disgusting is the degree to which that many of you in the establishment media have taken your marching orders from the DNC and from other liberal operatives in reference to the Tea Party. After the Tea Party revolution of 2010, many of you consumed and then projected some of the most vile, unfair things about the Tea Party. That it's racist, which I find particularly ironic, that it's sexist, that it's violent, disgraceful. You had no grounds for perpetuating this mythology about the Tea Party. So I want all of you to ask the question to yourselves, what did you do to help create this environment where the IRS, an agent of government, can operate with such impunity. And we don't ask for special treatment. We only ask for decency and fairness. Thank you. Thank you, Congressman.
Thank you, Niger. That was excellent. I appreciate it. We have a number of other leaders from Tea Party organizations from across the United States, from California, from Mississippi, from Tennessee, from Oklahoma. We have them all across the United States that are here and present. Again, we have many members of Congress that are standing behind. They could tell you the stories that they have heard. Diane Black has had Tea Party organizations in Tennessee that have been adversely affected. We have also from Georgia. Paul Brown is here from the state of Georgia. Tea Party organizations have been adversely affected from the state of Texas. We had Representative Louis Gohmert, Bill Flores. We have a number of members of Congress, all of whom are available to speak with the press afterwards. We have so many people here with so many stories. We could be here for a long time, but what we'd like to do is open up and take a few questions. But again, we want to make it very clear our members of Congress are here and available to answer your questions, as well as the leadership from Tea Party organizations from across the United States. I encourage you to speak directly and personally with our members of Congress and with the Tea Party organizations. They have a lot of shocking details and stories to share with you. And with that, I'd like to open up your...
I got a question. Do you think the problem's fixed since the president let somebody go that came on board about 6 months ago?
Well, my colleague, Representative Louis Gohmert, has just joined your ranks now. He's a part of the media. He's asking some of the questions. Louis, you're asking a great question. He asked if yesterday the president engaged in damage control 101. He wanted to stop the story because the president's had a no good, very bad week this last week. And so what we saw again is one more canard coming out of the White House where they said that they were asking for the resignation, and it looked like this was going to be a big shakedown by taking down the head, Mr. Stephen Miller of the IRS, when we find out subsequently that Mr. Miller was scheduled to resign anyway and leave the IRS as of the early part of June. Again, the American people have not been told the truth, and what we need to know is what did the White House know and when did they know it. So with that, we'll open up to your questions.
Legislation being planned to address this?
Right now, the question was regarding legislation. Right now in the media, we will have hearings, and various committee chairs have already indicated that. Darrell Issa in the House of Representatives, as well as Dave Camp, the chair of Ways and Means. But there is legislation that's being promoted. Mike Turner of Ohio has already indicated that he wants to put forward legislation with criminal penalties for individuals within the IRS who misuse tax data. I can tell you, as a former tax litigation attorney, because of the very sensitive nature and the understanding from the common sense point of view that it is wrong for the IRS to misuse personal tax data, we had very, very strict requirements that we could not act without the area of our jurisdiction. We had very thick manuals for standard operating procedure. We had to check every box. Our work product, it didn't matter if you were an attorney, if you were in appeals, if you were in collection, or if you were writing the statutory notices of deficiency. It didn't matter. Your work product was checked by your supervisor, and you could not act beyond your jurisdiction. So,
Michelle, do we have any reason to believe that the administration knew about this targeting?
The question was asked if we have any reason to believe that the administration knew about this targeting. This is the question that the American people want to know. This is what all of the Tea Party leaders behind me want to know, as well as members of Congress. What was it that the White House knew? Were they involved? Did they know? Were they involved in the directives? That's why there will be a request for emails from the President of the United States. And what the President needs to say is that he and his administration will be fully cooperative with the United States Congress so that we can restore the American people's trust and the credibility of the IRS.
Congresswoman, earlier this week we've heard the word impeachment tossed around up here on Capitol Hill. Is that something that should be considered? Do some of you feel like that is something that should be considered in this case?
I'll let anyone come to the microphone who'd like to answer that, but I will tell you, as I have been home in my district, in the 6th District of Minnesota, there isn't a weekend that hasn't gone by that someone says to me, Michelle, what in the world are you all waiting for in Congress? Why aren't you impeaching the President? He's been making unconstitutional actions since he came into office. So I will tell you what I'm hearing from people back home, but is there anyone here that would like to address that? Has anyone heard something? Jenny Beth?
Right now what we're saying is we want to know, that's why we need an investigation. Well, it's why we need to know who started this and why and when, and is it only contained to the IRS or does it go further?
We also don't want to jump to conclusions. We want to go where the facts lead us, and we aren't interested in creating our own facts, contrary to some of our federal agencies. So is there anyone else?
Can you talk about why Tea Party groups want government recognition, especially as nonprofits, considering that by all appearances they're pretty political?
Let's have some Tea Party organizations answer that question. Okay, let's have Jordan. Alan, we're going to hear from Alan, an attorney who's going to answer that question. Thank you, Alan. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm Alan Dye. What's the question again? Why is...
The question was, why do Tea Party groups want political or want any kind of recognition from the government, particularly tax-exempt status, when they seem to be largely political?
I think you're making an assumption that's not correct. The organizations vary, and most of them are not entirely political. Most of them are interested in legislation and public policy, which is not politics and which is permitted for C4 organizations. So
go ahead, Tom. Thank you. That's a great answer.
This is really an important point for all the media and all the American public to understand. We did not seek 501c4 status. We are businessmen, we're farmers, we're teachers, machinists, and we just were trying to do the prudent thing to run our tea parties. I mean, when we started taking bus trips to Washington, D.C., you have to have money, and you have to handle that money. You have to have insurance. You have to take care of your business. So we did the prudent thing. We thought we were going to be corporations. But in a pre-Citizens United world, we learned that you couldn't be a corporation because your corporation didn't have the ability to do these type of things. It was considered political taking a bus trip. We did not seek 501c4 status. What happened was when we started to say, what do we do, the IRS told us we must seek it. And they told us we must seek tax exemption. We did not want that. We're happy to pay our taxes. The Tea Party people, we pay our taxes.
Jordan
Seculo
from American Center of Law.
I would add this. All of our clients here, they voluntarily subjected themselves to government oversight. They're not rogue. These were individuals who said, we want to do the right thing, as Tom was just talking about. We are subjecting ourselves to voluntarily, not just government oversight one time, but for the rest of our existence. Our records, our 990s that we'll have to file, our forms that we'll have to file. So these were individuals not trying to flout the law and skirt the law, but the opposite, to do the right thing, to say, here I am, government, here's what we're doing, here's the money we're spending, and here's how we're using it. And so that is the key. They were submitting themselves to the IRS. It was the IRS who unconstitutionally and illegally targeted them. This is harassment at a level that is certainly a civil suit worthy and possibly criminal. And I want everybody in the media to understand that.
Okay. Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the bill be read a third time and passed. The motion to reconsider be laid upon the table.
Without objection.
I suggest the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
What is happening to their country so that they can make the judgment when it comes to Election Day which direction they want the future of our country to go into and what opportunities their grandchildren and future generations can have. We are trying to put forth the principles of the United States Constitution on which this country was founded and became the most successful country and envy of the world in the history of mankind. And our political activities are severely limited under the guidelines of a 501c4, and we adhere to those guidelines, and yet we still received an egregious 8-page letter from the IRS asking for every minutia of detail, turning over our donors' names, sponsors' names. Our funding has dried up because of this. Our membership has been hurt because the IRS has asked for the names of every member and every volunteer, and it's just absolutely outrageous.
We have Amy Kramer, who's also a national Tea Party leader from the Tea Party Express, and she also wanted to be able to weigh in on this important issue this morning. Amy Kramer.
Thank you, Congresswoman Bachmann, and thanks to all the members and all the activists that are here today. This is an extremely important issue that obviously I think we're just scratching the surface. We've been focused on it for quite some time. Last February I reached out to the Speaker's office and to the Senate because it was obviously a targeted effort to these grassroots groups that were popping up across the country, and so I'm glad that it's finally coming to light, and I think that we all need to band together and not let this be brushed under the rug, because this is a violation of our First Amendment rights, and that's a fundamental part of being an American. And this government, they work for us. We hire them, and this is an absolute abuse of power, and it's concerning that when the IRS is abusing their power and they're going to be the ones to implement Obamacare. They've already got a class action lawsuit against them for medical records out in California, accessing private medical records. I mean, what's going to happen to our medical records when they are implementing Obamacare? This is not acceptable, and we need to stand strong on this, and I thank you for holding this today.
Thank you, and that's why...
Go ahead.
Denied status, and do you have a number on that?
There are a bunch that have been, have not been granted.
Gohmert of Texas.
Has not been granted. Some have withdrawn. Some are still awaiting. I found out about a new one in Florida just a while ago. They're not here. They thought they were suffering in silence. But I want to go back to this question here about, you know, why were you seeking legal status? Have you heard what has happened? You have a government that is forcing people to get a legal status in order to just come up here and have their voices heard. And then once they force you into this funnel of having to have legal status, then they use that to intimidate and abuse to prevent opposite views from being heard. This is a government gone run amok. And if the AP story has taught anything, it should be to the media that when there is a tyrannical despot, the media will be one of the early victims. You will be used as helpful savants for a while, and then when you are no longer needed, you'll be pressured and put out of business as well. This is a very, very dangerous time, and it's an interesting question. Why would you want legal status? Because this is the way a tyrannical government comes into being and perpetuates itself.
And again, I just want to remind that later today we'll be voting in the House of Representatives to repeal Obamacare. We have even more impetus than ever to repeal Obamacare. Many people have said this issue is dead. Many people have said that Obamacare is here to stay. We are here as the people's representatives, as real people from across the United States, to say this issue is now revived. It is back on the table. We fully believe that the American people will demand, because what they've seen with the abuse of power from this administration and the IRS, a full-scale repeal of Obamacare, not just in the House of Representatives, but also the United States Congress. We believe that the heat will become so hot that even the President of the United States will be forced to repudiate his signature legislation. We thank you for being here today. We make available to you all of the members of the United States Congress who have so much to say on this issue. We have over 20 real Tea Party organizations who have been hurt and abused. They're up here, and we encourage you to take advantage of the people to speak to them directly on this story, and we thank you for coming today.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Good morning. Here we are in National Women's Health Week, again proclaiming the glories of the Affordable Care Act and what it means to women. I'll talk about that in a moment. When it comes to addressing the urgent needs up for the American people, our priority in Congress is clear. We must create jobs. Unfortunately, House Republicans seem to think that their main responsibility is to do nothing. Oh, for those of you who were here yesterday, you know that I have lost my voice. That may be good news to some. But let's see how far we can go with this. It's to do nothing. Here we are 134 days into the 113th Congress without one vote on a jobs bill. 54 days after the Senate passed its budget. We still haven't moved forward to the budget process. But this do-nothing agenda does not reflect the priorities of the American people. It is an agenda that only the Republicans seem interested in pursuing. And so you see a series of subterfuges, job evasions. Today's job evasion is that the Republicans have decided to vote on the Patients' Rights Repeal Act, their 37th attempt to repeal our country's landmark health reform bill. That's 37 votes, 43 days, $52.4 million on an obvious evasion. Our responsibility to work on the priorities of the American people. Not only is this a clear waste of time and of taxpayer dollars, it is a deliberate vote to eliminate the affordable, quality health and care benefits millions of Americans are already enjoying. For those of you who were with us yesterday, you got the card with many of the provisions that are already in effect in the Affordable Care Act. 105 million Americans are already receiving free preventive services. More than 100 million Americans no longer face a lifetime limit on their health coverage. 17 million children with pre-existing conditions are no longer denied coverage. Soon, being a woman will not be considered a pre-existing medical condition. As you see, these are already in effect, though. Preventive services, coverage for young adults and children, being women. As you know, many more provisions are there. 6.6 million young adults up to the age of 26 have taken advantage of the law to obtain health insurance through their parents' insurance policies. 6.3 million seniors in the donut hole have saved $6.1 billion on their prescription drugs. The list goes on and on. Needless to say, we'll be talking about this on the floor of the House. Not only is this a vote that jeopardizes access to affordable, quality health care, is it a vote that explodes the deficit. I don't know if I have a copy of the letter, but just yesterday, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office told Speaker Boehner that repealing the Affordable Care Act would increase the deficit by $109 billion over the next 10 years. $109 billion. Instead of evading job creation, House Republicans should spend every day working to strengthen the middle class. It's time for Republicans to live up to their call for regular order. We were there with the president. They said what they wanted was regular order. Music to our ears. For those of you who don't know what regular order is and want to be reminded, it means you pass a bill from committee, you go to the floor, you pass it in the committee, on the floor in both houses, and then you go to conference table. In order to go to the conference, you have to have appointees. And so we want to appoint conferees. Republicans have said no to that. You're getting lucky. I'm losing my voice. But this is really, they used the excuse that the Senate had not passed a bill. 53 days ago, the Senate passed a bill. So we're long overdue to go to the table. And why is that important? It's important because so much is at stake. we have 750,000 jobs have been lost by sequestration. You know the other list. 400 million Meals on Wheels, tens of thousands of children thrown off Head Start. Now their parents cannot be parents earning while children are learning. The list goes on, not to mention also what it does to the security of our country, which even Senator McCain has said is insane. So one way to get rid of the sequestration is to go to the table and to come to terms, to reconcile differences, to have a budget that creates jobs, that reduces the deficit, does so in a balanced way, and gets rid of sequestration. How can you call for regular order and not take yes for an answer? Must be held accountable. Again, we want to create jobs and reduce the deficit. This agenda deserves a vote. What are they afraid of? Are they afraid of the transparency of a meeting where, in public view, in front of the world, TV and media coverage, their priorities have to be subjected to the light of day versus the priorities of the President of the House and Senate Democrats of job creation, deficit reduction, strengthening the middle class? On another subject, as I stated earlier this week, in regard to the IRS, it's clear that the actions taken by some at the IRS must be condemned. Those who engaged in this behavior were wrong and must be held accountable for their actions. Regardless of political affiliation or bias, there is no place for this type of activity by the IRS or its employees. Senator Lieu has asked for and received the resignation of the acting commissioner. There will be bipartisan hearings on the subject in the Ways and Means Committee tomorrow, and I'm hopeful that meaningful bipartisan oversight will be found among all the committees of jurisdiction with respect to these matters. It's interesting to me because I think these actions highlight why we must overturn Citizens United. It has exacerbated the challenge that we have. It's been out there, but Citizens United has made matters so much worse. As you know, it's a very thin line, and maybe we must pass a law that makes it much clearer that these so-called social welfare organizations must make their priority promoting social welfare rather than engaging in politics. Clearly, this has not been, I paint everybody with the same brush, right to left, so I think it all should go. That's why I have issued my DARE, disclose. Who are these people? They go to the 501c4 because they don't have to have any disclosure. Their shareholders, their customers, their employees don't have to know where this money is going. Disclose, amend the Constitution, overturn Citizens United, reform the whole political system to reduce the role of money, and empower people by empowering small donors and removing obstacles to everyone's voting. This is something that I think, because the IRS issue has called attention to it, we must take advantage of. Disclose and amend would go a long way to making our democracy stronger, not having a government of the money, but a government of the many, as our founders intended. With that, I'd be pleased to take any questions. Were you here yesterday? Okay, who was here yesterday?
You always invoke the Williams.
I understand that, but we were having a very important message about women, and I want to reward those who came.
Rosa DeLauro, she owned it yesterday.
Was she great?
Got out there. In light of everything that's happened with these three events that have been somewhat of a drag on the White House, do you feel this president still has the ability to push significant legislation through this Congress? And do you think that you could once again become Speaker because of the terrible pitfall this IRS mess will have for your 2014 candidates?
Well, the second question is almost irrelevant, with all due respect. It isn't about whether I become Speaker. It's about whether we have an election where people can weigh in and every vote is counted as cast and money does not determine the outcome. I do want the Democrats to win, yes, but let's put that aside for the moment. This president is they make so much of these issues because this president is such a great president. He's a visionary. You've heard me say this so many times. This is a great president. He's a visionary. He has knowledge of our country and the concerns of the American people that give him judgment as to what plan we should have to go forward to strengthen the middle class. And he has an eloquence to convey that message. They fear that. And so any issue that comes up, they will try to exploit. And some of them are legitimate issues, but they should not dominate everything. And so what I think is that they have used talking points on Benghazi. They will use the IRS. They will use the AP. They will use these as, again, subterfuges, evasions of what the American people want us to do here. They want us to create jobs. Now, if you're a party in Congress and you have no intention of creating jobs, you want to change the subject. So I think this is as much about enforcing their anti-government ideology of not a public role in the creation of jobs, as well as undermining the President of the United States. People have spoken. The election took place. He won. You would think there would be some time frame where we could engage in job creation. But as I say, so far, not one job initiative. But I think the President is strong, and because he's strong and because he's effective, they make him the object of their political action. We know how that works, but I have great confidence in him. And as for getting something through this Congress, well, the last 2 years there was nothing that went through this Congress, and there was no AP, IRS, or any other initialed organizations that we were dealing with. They just want to do nothing. And their timetable is never, does never and nothing work for you. That's who they are. One more of somebody who was here yesterday, and then we'll open it up to the others. That it? No questions from those who were here yesterday? Okay.
Okay, thanks. Well, yesterday the President said that the acting IRS commissioner would be stepping down. His term was to end in June, so he didn't have much more time on his watch, though. Has the President, though, done enough? Was that a strong enough step? Because some people said, well, this guy was out the door already no matter what.
Well, he's there now, and it's about what happened. It's about what has happened. I don't know why. Am I missing something here? Has anybody mentioned that the director who left, and therefore now we have an acting director, was a Bush appointee, and that Miller is a career. He's a career. So these are not Obama appointees. But it happened on their watch, and we think they've been less than forthcoming to the Congress about what was going on when they knew about it. And so, no, you don't stay until the end of your term. I think the President, Secretary Lew made the right recommendation, and the President took advantage of that, and I think that was the right thing to do. I mean, the IRS, those are three scary initials to most people, not because they think they've done anything wrong, but they just worry that we treated fairly. These people were not treated fairly. That was wrong. Somebody must be held accountable. Yes, sir. Who? I hear voices. Yes, sir.
What is your reaction to Secretary Sebelius asking the health insurance industry for funds to implement the health care law? And also, have you ever asked donors to contribute to a 501c4?
501c4. Well, I don't. Is that what Secretary Sebelius is?
I'm sorry. She's asking them to donate.
Oh, so two different things.
Yeah.
Okay. I think. Let me just say this. Let's just to review. When the Republicans passed the Medicare prescription drug bill in the beginning of the President Bush's term, they spent a fortune of public dollars promoting it. Now they criticize this administration for spending much less than that to promote. It's not a question of promote, isn't this wonderful? It's a question of you need to sign up for this. We have a responsibility to do outreach to. So when they were doing it then, I thought they did it to excess. But nonetheless, there was a responsibility to make sure people signed up, however whatever I thought of that bill, which I thought was bad. But nonetheless, they didn't, and that was their responsibility to get people to sign up. That's the responsibility now. So I think that that initiative is one that they, who should they be to criticize something they did to the hilt? Secondly, when we were passing the Affordable Care Act, there were hundreds of millions of dollars spent during the debate misrepresenting, mischaracterizing, I don't like to use this word, lying about what was in or not in the Affordable Care Act. It was going to be death panels, it was going to be about abortion, it was going to be this, that, and the other thing, none of which was true. But nonetheless, whether it was true or not, hundreds of millions of dollars spent by the private sector for this purpose. So this is not an unusual thing that the private sector would weigh in, and it's people who want to have people sign up in furtherance of the purpose of the bill. That was to defeat a bill. This isn't about that. That's over. This is the law of the land. And so, no, I don't have any problem with her doing that. I think that 501c4 should be done away with. I have been talking about this for years, and now it's really because of Citizens United that this is exploited. When I say done away with, there are legitimate purposes for 501c4s to promote social well-being, whatever the issue agenda is. But the fine line that is drawn between your primary purpose being promoting social welfare and not politics, your primary purpose, well, your secondary purpose could be politics, and that's not what a 501c4 should be about. So from my standpoint, I think that they should not have any political purpose, and I would hope that we could change the law on that. Some of the advertising you see on TV is really not 501c4, though. It's 527, that kind of thing, and people get it all mixed up. But it's all wrong. It's all wrong. It has to go. Yes, sir. You can.
In 2010, your speakership ended in a wave of anti-government activism on the part of the Tea Party, and I wonder if we are with the IRS scandal and with the drumbeat coming on some of these other issues like Benghazi. Do you think that we are on the cusp of another rise in anti-government fervor for a midterm election?
Well, I think that, bless their hearts, this is what the Republicans, not all of them, but a large number of Republicans in the House believe, and they act upon their beliefs. And it's reflected in the lack of job creation and any other public role, as you see in the sequestration, cutting biomedical research, those kinds of things. So that is a, I think no is the answer to the question, because I think this, people now know that this is who these people are, and they have a legitimate point of view. The role of government has been a historic debate since the beginning of our country. I add, though, that President Washington cautioned about political parties that were at war with their own government. So where are you on the spectrum of the role of government, or should there be none? Do nothing, never. And I think that that challenges our, shall we say, political astuteness to take that message to the people. But it's not stealth anymore. It's not stealth anymore. And these incidences, well, I don't know, talking points on Benghazi, I think is really a disservice to the issue of the protection of our diplomats, our intelligence community, our men and women in uniform who keep us safe. I think that on the talking points, the President's right. That piece of it is a sideshow. It's an evasion of what we really need to do. We need to pass a budget that fully protects, to the extent that we can. There's no guarantee, but to the extent that we can, our diplomats abroad. So getting back to the main point of your question, I think, what happened in 2010 was, in around June, around now, a little few more weeks, the Senate defeated the Disclose Act. It defeated the Disclose Act. We had passed it in the House. The Disclose Act was the most central determination for the special interest as to whether they would contribute to these 501c4s. And that, when the Senate failed, 59 votes, not one Republican vote, even though some had espoused this in their own states, all of a sudden they were against it here. So when the Senate passed that, or didn't pass that, it was the signal. The floodgates opened, and endless, undisclosed, special interest money came pouring out the doors. And that was something that had an impact on the elections, because it was, first of all, we were opposed to it to begin with, but they weren't, and they had endless, when I talk about endless resources, never-ending spigot of money, misrepresenting the facts. So that had an impact on the election too, and the Republicans, I think, hijacked, which were some legitimate concerns that people had about the role of governments, what they believe, and now they're here. But when you come here, we are the legislative branch. The first article of the Constitution, the legislative branch. And you should come here to legislate, to have your point of view heard, to influence the decision, but to have a decision. And the decision can't be to do nothing. And so what they're here to do is to undermine the legislative branch. And I think that it behooves us to make that distinction clear to the public. And I don't think that talking points on Benghazi or the IRS or the AP, because we don't like what happened either. It's not as if we're, I think what the administration did on the talking points is what they did on Benghazi. I support them on that. But AP and UPI, we have serious questions about that. It's not like we're all siding against the administration. I'll talk about AP if you want. So no, I think we're in good shape. I think we're strong. We're attracting great candidates. We've outdone everything. Any M you can outmaneuvered, outmessaged, raised money, mobilized, and out-recruited the candidates for the next election. I can't tell you today that I think we will win. I think I can tell you we can win. I can't tell you that we will win. But I probably know in October or November, once we see the candidates on both sides. On AP, let me just say it, because I'm going to have to, there's somebody else coming in the room in a couple minutes, and I want to make this point. I think the AP issue is an interesting one. I want to remind you, because I don't know if any of you were around at the time, but in 2000, there was a bill, the intelligence bill passed the Congress, and it went to conference, and it was a bill that was going to be sent to the President. I said to the President, President Clinton, who was now becoming the senior Democrat on the Intelligence Committee, I said to the President Clinton, do not sign the intelligence bill. And he very astutely, as he has always said, did you sign the conference report? And I said, no, I did not sign the conference report. And he said, okay. So and I told him what was in there. And in there was a provision that said that the burden of proof as to whether a journalist's activity threatened national security, the burden of proof was on him or her to disprove that what he did or she did not endanger our national security. That's a tremendous burden of proof. The burden of proof should be the opposite. The burden of proof is on the government to say that you did, and here was how we can prove it. The burden of proof should not be on the journalist to dispel that. And we had he showed it, we took it out of the bill, and then we passed a bill without it. In 2009, we had another bill, a SHIELD Act bill, to try to give more protections to journalists. We passed it in the House. Mr. From Virginia, Rick Boucher was the author of it. And it passed the House. It was a strong bill. We don't have time to go into all the protections. Perhaps next week we can. That were in the bill for journalists. It didn't pass in the Senate. So now, with all of this coming up, I think it's really important for us to go back to that place where there are protections for journalists. Of course, we have national security concerns, but it's all about a balance. And it's all about being fair. And we were recommending an independent judge to make those decisions, not to be made by one party or the other, the administration. So that's fun. At the time, in 2000, we had the support of editorial boards throughout the country. The community, the media community mobilized with us to, well, they had their own point of view on the subject, but we all benefited from the fact that they weighed in, and it came out of the bill, and we were able to pass the bill without it. But unfortunately, no, the speaker's coming.
Do you agree with him that agency officials should go to jail?
I'm not one who's judge, jury, sentencer, and the rest. I think the administration's, the committees are looking into it. The President has asked for and received the resignation of the top person there. I think we're on a good track. We have to learn more about everything, but I don't agree that any one of us should declare who should go to jail. Oh, my goodness, what a day that would be around here, huh? Anyway, thank you all very much. Thank you for restoring my voice.
Morning, everyone. Today, the House is voting to repeal the President's health care law because it's increasing the cost of health insurance, reducing access to care, and making it harder for small businesses to hire new workers. This is the third full repeal vote that we've had in the last 3 years. And some critics have suggested it's a waste of time. Well, while our goal is to repeal all of Obamacare, I would remind you that the President has signed into law 7 different bills that repealed or defunded parts of that law. Is it enough? No. A full repeal is needed to keep this law from doing more damage to our economy and raising health care costs. But some progress has been made, and Republicans will continue to work to scrap the law in its entirety so we can focus on patient-centered reforms that lower cost and protect jobs. Because jobs is what this is all about. These are the thousands and thousands of pages of Obamacare regulations. And if we want jobs, we need to get rid of this, because this is getting in the way of employers hiring workers around the country. That's why we continue to be focused on repeal, because we want to improve the economy and improve the prospects for creating jobs in our country. Listen, jobs is our primary focus, but while we're focused on that, we're also focused on holding this administration accountable. Our committees are working overtime to uncover the truth about what happened in Libya, and they're trying to get to the bottom of what happened in the IRS scandal. You know, public service requires humility, and everyone in public office needs to be constantly reminded that they serve the American people, and it's not the other way around. Americans should never be targeted or harassed by their government for their political beliefs. And if reporters' telephone calls are being monitored, the government better have a clear and convincing reason for doing so. And when American people or Americans are killed abroad, the government should tell the truth, not shade it or stonewall it for partisan purposes. Our system requires the bonds of trust between the American people and their government. And those bonds, once broken, are very hard to repair. Nothing dissolves the bonds between the people and their government like the arrogance of power here in Washington. And that's what the American people are seeing today from the Obama administration. Remarkable arrogance. This House will stop at nothing to get to the American people the answers and the accountability that they expect. But the best way to repair this damage is for the administration to come forward with the truth, the whole truth, so that the American people will have all of the facts.
Mr. Speaker, when you say that people should go to jail, are you talking about the frontline managers who came up with this inappropriate criteria, or are you talking about the top brass who didn't admit what happened to Congress?
I think I want to see the facts. I want to know how this happened, who was responsible for it. It's clear that there is law. Section 7214 of the Title 26 of the U.S. Code states very clearly, any officer or employee of the United States acting in connection with any revenue law of the United States who is guilty of extortion or willful oppression under the color of law shall be dismissed from office and, if convicted, be fined up to $10,000 and spend 5 years in jail. We need to know where the facts are. Somebody made a decision to do this, and I doubt that it were some low-level employees in the Cincinnati field office.
Mr. Speaker, Colonel O'Malley sent you a letter requesting that you support the legislation H.R. 940. Are you going to do what he has requested?
I've not seen his letter, and I'm not familiar with what H.R. 940 is.
Before the House passed the first repeal bill a few years ago, you promised both repeal and replacement legislation that more Americans would support. Are you still planning that? If so, when? And should we expect a series of small bills or something more comprehensive?
There was a discussion yesterday about that subject. And I expect our conference in the coming weeks to have a discussion about Obamacare and how we're going to deal with it and what the replacement legislation would look like.
Looking at these series of investigations, Benghazi, IRS, Associated Press, in 1998, you were here and you were relieved of your duties as the chair of the conference when the Republicans didn't pick up seats in the midterm election in 1998. Granted, there's an appropriate place for oversight in these areas, but is there a line where all of these different investigations crosses too far and there starts to be a potential backlash against your side going into 14?
Well, that's why I continue to talk about jobs. It's our number one focus. But we have two jobs here. Our job is to legislate, and we're trying to legislate things that will help create jobs in our country. But we also have a responsibility under the Constitution to provide oversight of the executive branch of government. We have 4 Americans who lost their lives in Libya. Their families want to know what happened. The American people want to know what happened. We've got Tea Party groups around the country who had their applications for their 501c status delayed and delayed and delayed. And this morning I found out that one of them is in my district. 2 years ago, this group came to my office to inform me that they had not received their any explanation or gotten their results, and they still haven't gotten them. Asked me not to do anything, but wanted me to be aware of it. You've got the Justice Department tapping phones of those in the media. Listen, we have a job to get to the truth, and the administration can make this a lot easier. by doing what they started to do yesterday, turning over emails from Benghazi. But they could make this a lot simpler by being upfront with the Congress and being upfront with the American people.
Is there a line there that goes too far in the eyes of public on these?
Listen, when you're trying to seek the truth, and if that is the goal, to seek the truth, there is no line. Chuck.
Mr. Speaker, these scandals that you've outlined have put the administration on the defensive and given some momentum to your party. How do you use that momentum for good purposes? How do you channel that and use it for your legislative agenda?
Listen, you've got to play the cards you're dealt. Some days you get dealt a bad hand, you still have to play it. Our job is to remember that we work for the American people. Our job is to be fair, open, and honest in dealing with our political adversaries. But at the end of the day, if we're doing our job correctly and we're seeking the truth on behalf of the American people, that's the right thing to do.
Will it affect the legislative agenda in one way or another?
I don't expect that it will. We've got a job here to legislate. We're trying to do everything we can to create jobs, and we're going to continue to do that.
Mr. Speaker, as you know, the health care law is not getting any popular in the minds of the public. Is this the only time the House will vote on repealing, or do you plan on other votes over the next year and a half?
When we have further votes that we'll take, we'll let you know.
Mr. Speaker, on immigration, are you putting pressure on the bipartisan group to come out with legislative proposals soon? And are you concerned that those talks are starting to implode?
I am concerned that the bipartisan group has been unable to wrap up their work. And I know that there are some very difficult issues that have come up. But I continue to believe that the House needs to deal with this. And the House needs to work its will. How we get there, we're still dealing with it.
Speaker Boehner, in light of what's happened with Benghazi, the AP, and the IRS, do you still trust President Obama?
Listen, it's not about trusting someone. Our job here is to get to the truth. And we're going to get to the truth. I know what you're up to. I'm not taking the bait.
What's your reaction when the president says he's not negotiating over the debt ceiling?
Well, you know, it's easy to make a statement to that effect, but it's just not reality. The fact is that his Treasury Department needs to pay the bills. The debt limit has to be dealt with, and should be dealt with in a responsible way. And he can't continue to increase the debt limit without doing something about what's driving the increase in the debt limit, and that is out-of-control spending. David?
Mr. Speaker, Republicans have said for some time that they wanted to replace the health care bill with something. When do you think Republicans might come up with an alternative?
Well, we offered an alternative during the consideration of Obamacare, 7 or 8, maybe 9 different pieces that would include things like allowing people to buy insurance across state lines, dealing with the problem of those with pre-existing conditions by expanding the risk pools that were out there. Things like one of the big drivers of the health care cost increase, and that's reforming medical malpractice, which, yes, it causes a lot of doctors increase in premiums, but more significantly, there are reports that up to 25% of the tests that are ordered for the only reason is to cover some doctor's backside from the threat of a lawsuit. These are the kinds of things that I would expect to continue to believe will be in our type of replacement legislation.
That was 2 elections ago. When do you think the current Republican conference might have an alternative?
The issue is Obamacare. And we're going to keep the focus on Obamacare because it's driving up the cost of health care. It's reducing access for the American people, and it's making it harder for small businesses to hire workers.
Mr. Speaker, if the House bipartisan group can't reach an agreement, what's the fallback option for immigration in the House?
We'll let you know when we decide, except that I've made it clear that I think the House must act on this, and I think we should do so in a responsible way. Thanks.